Welcome to The Impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. I'm Matt, and I'm back this week with my brother, Austin Douglas. How you doing today, man?
Fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Today, we have a really interesting topic that was actually requested by multiple members of our online school community. If you guys have not checked that out yet, click the top link in our show description and go on and visit our community. It's a immersive group of like-minded individuals all growing and learning together on a community-based platform set up like social media, but with none of the bots, none of the negativity, none of the advertisements, none of the bad stuff that we have with social media today. It's just a group where we can go, hang out, learn from each other, meet new people, connect, communicate, all of the things that social media was originally intended to do. This platform accomplishes it. And on top of that, we have tons of coursework, regular group meetings, all kinds of stuff for you to dive deeper into our message and become a part of this show off camera, as well as maximizing your own potential in the pursuit of your impossible goals. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. What our members in the school community were wanting us to speak on and finding that they have struggles with in their own daily life, and it's something that I believe we all struggle with, is the idea of negotiating with your own time, the idea of negotiating with the tasks you have to accomplish to achieve the goals you want, and ultimately what it leads to is negotiating with your own value. And so we're going to dive into this concept of when you wake up in the morning and you have this idea of the list of things you want to accomplish for the day, how do you guarantee those things get accomplished, not let them fall by the wayside, not start building a narrative in your mind that says, oh, it's okay if I don't accomplish these things, or I'll just do that tomorrow, or I'll do that next week, or I just don't want to hit that right now. There are certainly times where we have to cut certain things out of our lives so that we can focus on what's truly important, aligned with our priorities. But when we have those critical tasks decided for the day, how do we build enough value in ourselves, in our mission, in our vision for the work we're doing, that we don't allow ourselves to negotiate? You guys hear all the time the art of negotiation, how to negotiate in building contracts, building businesses, driving sales. But actually the most profound piece of business knowledge, and I think translationally life knowledge that I've ever heard, was the idea that you should never negotiate with price, i.e. you should never negotiate with your time. Because when we negotiate with our resources, we say, this is not worth as much. And by negotiating with these resources, we negotiate with our own value. And we can never allow that to happen. The whole point of our message and a lot of what our platform does is to build such an unruly belief and faith in our own potential, to build so much value from the people we are driving to become, that it brings forth an impossible version of ourselves. So, listen into today's episode, learn how to not negotiate with your resources because we never negotiate with our own value. Learn how to build this value in the first place, how to hold it, maintain it, and continue to grow it over time, ultimately driving toward being that impossible version of yourself every single day of your life to achieve the goals and mission you have in life. And if you get something out of today's episode, as we know you all will, please share it with as many people as you know, because we will never run an ad on this show and interrupt these conversations. All we ask is that you help us grow in our mission and vision by sharing this episode, whether on social media or texting it or emailing it to friends. It helps more than you could ever know in our growth in spreading this message and building to a global culture that we discuss in our vision. So with that, turn things over to my brother, Austin Douglas. What's your thoughts, man?
So in terms of especially battling within the self of negotiating your time and especially negotiating as to what is valuable, I really do. The portion that I battle with on the daily is most certainly, like we were discussing before, on the more of the macroscopic scale, on the creative side of things, I suppose. And it's something that, at the end of the day, I find myself being very sharp in my analysis, very sharp in my criticisms, and very sharp in the reluctance of permitting myself to allow time to kind of slip by. And so what do I mean by the macroscopic? For what we're doing with Impossible Performance and who we're looking to impact, that is quite, I think we've made it obvious, but I guess I mean I can say it here, is that we want to impact as many people as possible. And that, that means we've set a cap on that at 8 billion. So, here we go. And so when we go forward with the projects and the manners of which we intend to get our message across, we have to, and I find myself continuously reminding myself that there is a much larger and broader point to all of that, and to make sure that when you're guiding yourself through the impact that you're trying to create, that it is something that's going to be impactful on a very large scale. And so when it comes to that realm, and the creative side is something that I most certainly find myself being mostly engaged in on that day-to-day sort of stature. It's difficult to keep that time within focus for the creative side when I'm trying to analyze it on a bit more of a microscopic scale. And so to take it from that, like, something that I am not perfect at and that I will continue to work on until the day that I die, is that, what can I work on? And that is giving the more microscopic and the more analytical sense, and the more focus based, in terms of making sure that on the microscopic portion that I'm able to keep things ordered for when we are attacking the macro. And so on the daily, this is something to where, we both tackle with in very different ways. You have your checklists, and you have, you have your, program. And for me, it's merely, I have to, with writing the Impossible novel, or when outlining such things, I have to make sure that, yes, there are, to a point, daily tasks that I have to accomplish, but at the same time, I've realized that I have to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. That wiggle room comes from, I have a day where I write, 2 pages, 700, 800 words, and that is all I'm going to be able to write. And in the past, I found myself being overly critical and overly punitive with myself in the days that came to where little to no creativity was happening or occurring or whatever. And no amount of lion's mane or alpha GPC or any amount of caffeine, unfortunately, will not allow me to just sit there and there's another 4 pages that I could have written that I couldn't have until I did that. No. There are many days where I get sort of the minimum that I require of myself to produce. And there are some days where I have produced, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages of stuff. And this it's more than just the Impossible novel. I try to write a short essay every day. I write and I journal every day as well. And the journal is just basically like making sure that some of my personal tasks are being done, like the program that I'm currently on and everything like that. especially in terms of production for the business, like I try to make sure that there's a minimum requirement met, and that's always met. But I will say, in terms of the recent 5.5 weeks, my production has been very, very little. And I know that you and I talked about that just recently, and it's something that has certainly impacted me, and I've allowed it to impact myself. So yes, you're hearing it and potentially watching it, everybody, that the great and powerful and the wise Austin Douglas has been low on production, in terms of creativity here of late. And it's something that, sure, I can observe it, but it's been difficult for me to admit it, and it's difficult for me, and I'm kind of shaking in this moment, just saying it, into a microphone that's recording me saying that I've been, little to basically, I wouldn't say underwhelming, but not to the degree of which I expect myself to be at. And what is something to take away from that? Well, one of them is merely the time that I've allowed to negotiate away from those moments to where I could have been productive. I'm not saying that I would have been productive. And Austin, how dare you? You're letting down those millions to billions of people that you're trying to impact. Like, you are just this low life. No, that's not the path that I want to go down anymore. Because that's a path that's a path that I did go down before. Long time ago, especially in university, and that's the reason why, one of the many reasons why, that my time in university was not as well spent as I wish it would have been, was because my self-analysis at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year was always just so, oh, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. I was so micromanaging myself to the degree of which it was not beneficial. It was overly punitive. It was really, I was not progressing in a manner of which I should have been. And it wasn't just because I wasn't necessarily not being productive in those times. It was because I was simply negotiating away time that I could have spent maybe just sitting there and thinking about something, and for myself, that's, again, just another battle that you have to face. But, for me, it's really, really helped in terms of writing is you also have to think about what you're going to write. And I know that sitting and thinking is something that can be extremely powerful and seductive for the part of your mind that wants to waste time, but also make you think about things that you don't necessarily want to think about. I've had struggles with that in the past, but of recent, that's kind of gone to the wayside. But negotiating the time away that I could have been a bit more productive, and realizing that the time that I wasn't productive, it's all about the measure and making sure that you're still on the micro, going, okay, in that time that I went for a walk, that would have been productive in some manner, necessarily wasn't productive in the way I wanted it to be productive, and meaning that I could have had a third page written instead of two. Yes, you find a way to put that extra time, that time that you negotiated away from one productive set into another productive set, is that you were still productive, and that's great, and that may help me in the long run to a degree. But I think what's mightily important is that you hold yourself accountable for that time that you're negotiating away, and that you're at least aware of it, that you're at least willing to give yourself the sort of correction of, hey, I'm going to be honest with myself. That half an hour that I spent, doom scrolling, that half an hour that I spent watching a video on YouTube that I really didn't need to watch because I didn't learn anything, I could have done something more productive. I most certainly could have done something more productive. Instead of going for the $10 meal that met my macros and we were all good, I went for the $25 meal plus tip plus tax, and it made me feel better. Sure, in the long run that might help me a little bit, but I negotiated something that would have been sufficient, and honestly I should have went down to something to where that it made me feel better, it made me feel more comfortable and stuff like that. And that's just, for me, the time and the value that I'm negotiating away in those moments is something that I won't say struggle with. It's something that I'm just simply a lot more aware of and a lot more in tune with myself in terms of when I go to that self-analysis of the day, when I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, on this macroscopic scale of what we're trying to achieve, like Austin, like you did that. Oh, stop. And let's take a breath and go, okay, this is what we accomplished. This is the time that I negotiated away into something that was not productive. But here's some here's some times that you negotiated into something that was productive, that was useful. And so I think for me, it's been a big, and of course there has to be a balance of both the micro and the macro. But for me, it's definitely been making sure that I'm not overly punitive, that I'm not overly judgmental of the time that I may not have been purely productive in the standpoint that I want it to be productive in. And you can find those different routes to do something else productive that, walking's better than sitting and doom scrolling, but walking was not as productive as getting another 300 words written, And so that is where I would say I still, again, I don't struggle. That is where I'm optimizing. That's my optimization in terms of negotiation of my time, and the value of that time is making sure that if I do something, it's going to be productive. If I don't do something productive, I try to make up for it afterwards. And again, not in a punitive way, in a way of, hey man, you rather need to do this. Like you allotted this time for this, we're going to do something else that's a little bit more productive to make up for this. That way we're net positive and we're net productive, net positive in production. So, and that definitely, for me, it's the macro that I deal with a lot more, and especially of recent when it comes to like the creativity mind, in my perspective of that.
You bring up a lot of really good points there, and I want to kind of address and dive into each one, but I wanted to take it back a little bit first because I realized we didn't necessarily define what value means, like personal value, self-value, self-worth. What does this really mean? What is this mechanism of what about it are we valuing? And when I think about that, there've certainly been times in my life, and I would imagine in your life as well, where I did not value the person that I was, not even a little bit. And in fact, I wanted so desperately to be different in some way that it triggered quite a lot of mechanisms pushing me down that path. And I think we all should get to a place where we value ourselves. But I don't think that necessarily has to just exist under the construct of valuing who we are, the actions we have, the thoughts, emotions that we have right now in this moment. I think we can place quite a lot of value in who we're working to become. And I think that fits really well into our framework of the Be Impossible mindset, because it's not just about valuing who I am right now. It's valuing the person that I'm building. And the person that I'm building is achieved through the tasks I have to accomplish each day to build that person. And really what we talk about in Being Impossible is it's literally being that person you want to become. So if you are somebody who's struggling with addiction, or you're somebody who's struggling with, I can't get done the work I want to get done in a day because I can't make myself turn the TV off, I can't quit watching Netflix, I can't eat the right food, I can't do whatever it is, we have to become extremely vivid about the person we're trying to become, the person, that impossible version of ourselves that we are building, what would that person think? What would that person feel? How would that person act? How would they treat others? How would they talk about the people in their lives? We can frame this under any different context in life. But whenever you're not certain on something, you can always think of it in terms of that question of, how would the person I'm working to build, that impossible version of myself, how would they behave in this particular instance? And then if we value that person enough, that person that we're working to build, if that is a strong enough power to influence our decision, we will be able to act accordingly in that manner. And so I wanted to bring that up because if you're in a spot right now where you think, man, I just don't have any value for myself, like I can't achieve daily tasks, like I don't even value who I am as a person, I think that's okay, because I've been there before. I know what that's like. You will build self-value as the person you are right now by becoming the person you admire most. By changing your thoughts, changing your feelings, changing your actions, changing the things that you don't value right now, and doing this on a daily basis. And you're not going to be perfect at it. You're going to fail at it probably every day for a long time. And even still, after a decade of work and endless dedication to it, you're still going to have daily failures. But the idea is that you get closer and closer toward that vision throughout the entire journey. And you eventually get to a point where, without even realizing it, you will have become that impossible version of yourself. And then once you create that version, you can set another version in the sights. And by going down that process, you will start to build immense value because you are becoming a person who you already admire and value. So that's kind of what we mean when we say self-value. And you bring up the idea that there are certainly two sides of this work that must be done. The path that we must follow in order to achieve the outcome we want. And really it's just two sides of being human. It's two sides of humanity. There's the creative side and the analytical side. And you can put whatever contextual words you want around those. That's really kind of the two sides of the coin of the human brain, if you will. And I really like to think of it in terms of, I associate creativity much more with human emotion, and I associate analytics much more with the human brain. It's just, in my brain, that's kind of the holes that they fall into, as far as how they align with the domains of performance we have. And you absolutely need both of those, and you cannot maximize one without the other. And creativity gives pull and meaning and drive and power to the analytics, and the analytics help kind of rein in and provide structure and a path forward to some of the creative power. And I think that's why you and I are so good together as partners in this business, is because you are so much more creatively driven and I'm so much more analytically driven, and we can kind of balance each other out and drive forward the best parts of ourselves accordingly. And so I think it makes for a great balance and a great relationship. And I think regardless of which camp you feel you fall into, you can still achieve this framework that we lay out. Like you said, I like having the coaching platform that I am being coached on right now. It's got 5 daily critical tasks, and I got to check off each of those tasks every single day without fail. And when I do fail, I have to go back and journal and learn from that and figure out how to not let that happen again. But every time I fail, as I said, that I told you before we started recording, it's because I negotiated with myself. I negotiated with the tasks, and I said, it's not actually that important that I get this done today. And when I think of it under that framework, it was very easy for me to accept that and not achieve that task. But if I flip the script and think of it instead from not in terms of, this task isn't that important. If I think of it, because I'm saying the same thing when I say that, I am also saying my value doesn't matter enough. The value I have for myself isn't important enough to complete this task. And when I think of it under that frame of reference, for me personally, that just like makes my heart want to explode with just rage and fiery passion and rebellion against the thought of that, because the tasks are generally so easy to complete that it is not worth even the smallest amount of sacrifice in personal value. Especially in the person I am now, but especially in the man I'm working to build, because I'm always working down this be impossible path. It will never be a journey that is complete. It will have levels, certainly, but each level will bring with it a new level in sight that can be achieved. And so when I think about it in those terms, it's a much more powerful driving, motivating force. But I really liked how you brought up in there that you have to give, I think you called it wiggle room, or like you have to give a certain area to work in with the task. So I think it's important for everybody to first figure out, what is it that you want? What is it you're working toward? And I think the best way to figure that out is not think of it in terms of, oh, I want to have this house or this car, or this amount of money, or whatever it is. I think the best way you can think about this is, what kind of person do I want to be? If you could design your ideal self, the person that you admire most, what would that person look like? How would they look? How would they think? How would they act? How would they feel? Put that down on paper if you have to. Figure out who is it I want to build. And that person, you build that person, they'll bring all the other stuff with it. Whatever else you want in life will come as you build that person. So I think it's better, at least for me, I find it much more fruitful to focus on the person I'm building. So figure out what it is you want, what that outcome looks like for you, and then figure out, what are the tasks? And it doesn't have to be a specific number. It could be 2 tasks, or the 2 tasks, 3 tasks, 4 tasks, 5 tasks, that if I complete these every day on a consistent basis, I will move incrementally closer to building that person. And if I compound that over a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and work every day to not miss on those tasks, I will without a doubt create that person. What are the tasks I need to complete to make that happen? Once you have those tasks figured out, they don't have to be like crazy, insurmountable tasks every day. Like most of mine are like, I'll pull them out right now. Like mine for today are spend 1 hour of uninterrupted time with my daughter, 3-minute cold plunge, and 60-minute chest and shoulder training, listening to 1 hour of health podcasts / books, recording a high-level podcast episode on reducing noise and focusing on critical tasks with Austin, and make a high-level educational post for school. Those in and of themselves are not difficult tasks to complete. And in fact, if I just sat down and did them all, I could probably, the podcast takes a little bit longer, but I could probably have them all done, even recording the full-length podcast, in a total of 3 hours, 4 hours worth of time in a day. There's 24 hours in a day. And so they don't have to be these crazy dramatic things, but those are all things that if I follow those out today and the next day and the next day and the next day for years and decades on end, I will build exactly the person I want to become, because they are that powerful in moving me forward. And if I get that level of experience and volume, it will build that expertise that leads to that impossible version of myself I'm creating. But I like that you talk about the wiggle room aspect of it, because the point is not that you define such specificity that you say, I have to write exactly 1,900 words, no fewer, every single day. Because the thing is, where the gap is bridged between the creative and the analytical, the mental and the emotional, if you will, is, I believe, in the human spirit. And creativity and analytics, neither can be forced. You can't force yourself to create at the highest level that you can exactly 1,900 words every day. And if you try to force yourself to do that, you are going to drop off so drastically in quality that you're actually wasting time at that point by forcing yourself to write. Same with me. I can't force myself to analyze every single aspect of every single platform of every single thing we're trying to accomplish. If I do that, my analysis is going to drop off so drastically to the point that I'm actually wasting my time. It happens in both those areas. But what we can do is we can dedicate ourselves to the practice of it every day. You can practice your creativity every day. There's no reason you can't sit down and write 10 words every day, and maybe those 10 words will lead to a sentence that leads to a paragraph that leads to a page. And all of a sudden you will realize, oh, today's a day where I'm really on fire. I've got ideas pouring forth. Things are locking in. Things are lining up. Today's a good day. I'll maximize this potential today. Then you may have another day where even those 10 words are a massive challenge, but you still practiced it. And what's more important is you practice it when it wasn't easy. And by practicing it on a daily basis, you maintain consistency. And that consistency is what builds up so much volume over time that those days where it's hard to put forth quality content will become fewer and fewer and fewer because you gain such a high level skill at that art. I won't break it all down, but the same exact concept applies to analysis. So reviewing all of that, because there was a lot we laid out there, you've got to understand what it is you value about yourself. And it can be the person you are right now. It can be the person, that impossible version of yourself you're building. And honestly, I think it's best when it's a mix of both. If you can find value for yourself right now, value for the person you're becoming, that's where the best balance exists. That's the first step. Second step is you've got to have an idea for the outcome. And that's best defined by the person you're working to build, the impossible version of yourself. Who is that person? Sit down, write it on paper, speak it into existence, whatever it is you need to do. Figure out who that person is. Next step is figure out what are the daily critical tasks, and they can change on a day-to-day basis. Those tasks I read out change slightly on a day-to-day basis, and it's perfectly fine. They can change slightly on a day-to-day basis, but you need to make sure they're still centered toward that step 3 of who is the person I'm trying to build. So they can change on a day-to-day basis, but come up with the tasks. What 2 to 5 is probably a good number. You don't want so many you get lost in them and so few that you're not actually maximizing your potential. But figure out what those tasks are. They don't have to be massive, overarching, inconquerable things. And in fact, I think they're best when they're relatively easy things to achieve that have high return on the resource invested into them. Figure out what those tasks are. And then last step is don't negotiate with that value from step 1. Because anytime you decide to not complete a task, you are saying, this person that I say I value, I don't actually value as much as I thought I did. So don't negotiate with that value. And we'll discuss strategy for that here in a minute. But I think the easiest strategy to completing those tasks and making sure they happen is to not waste time in them. So the number one most helpful thing for me that I found in those daily tasks, make them happen as quickly and as early as possible in the day. Because the further you go throughout the day, the more distractions that come up, the more tired you get, the easier it is to negotiate with your own value. And there's 2 things that happen by checking them off as early in the day as you can. A, you get them done. You make sure they're accomplished before any distractions, any potential negotiations can come up. But second, and almost even more powerful, is that by knocking them out early in the day, you actually reinforce that value inside of yourself. It makes you feel like if you have all your tasks checked off by 10 a.m., you're going to feel like, man, look, I've already accomplished all of my critical tasks for the day. I've already moved myself so far forward in who I want to become for the day. The day has been won. And you feel an immense amount of pride and satisfaction and gratitude from that basic knowledge. That helps build that self-value up even higher so that you'll be less likely to even want to negotiate with it going forward. And so you actually set yourself up for even better success, not just the rest of the day, but moving into the next day and the next day as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially, I'd like to pick a little bit more on the, where you brought up the, having so many extremely high peaks that you're wanting to, climb potentially in terms of like goal making. Because that's especially something that I tackled with, and still do to a point, is giving myself, instead of just for semantics sake, for giving myself 20 goals and 18 of them are fairly conquerable, not overly difficult, and then like one or two really really big things that are going to take a lot longer. Whereas back in the day, I used to be really bad of giving myself like, oh well, I'm going to do this one huge thing, one absolute Mount Everest task, and then you get the month end and you're just like, oh, two of the past 4 weeks I've done nothing towards achieving that, and I still somewhat struggle with that. And so yes, we can sit there and we can accomplish smaller things throughout the day. I know Dr. Jordan B. Peterson has always talked about, and some other influencers here and there and stuff. Obviously there's quite a few minds and voices now that are echoing through our heads. But I think, for me, it was always, I agree, accomplish as much as you can early in the day. And that's more than just, brushing your teeth, but like I make my bed. It's a hotel bed and it gets remade every, 3 or 4 days. But like, I really enjoy getting up, and after, after realizing that existence is upon me, I make the bed, and I kind of, remedy anything that's kind of out and about within the room, and then that gets me kind of ready for the day. But those are, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 tasks that I've accomplished just in the first half an hour of being alive for the day. And so I do find a lot of joy in that, and that's something that I know, especially, Dr. Peterson has talked about, like, more of, make your room before you challenge and judge the world. And that's something that I've taken quite personally, I would say, because there are obviously particular positions that we are finding ourselves in, to where, and especially myself, this is very personal, in that I've always been very much the compromising individual. Like, oh, there's always compromise. Oh, there's always a compromise between two sides. And I still believe that to a degree, but at the same time, like, there's that left a void in me that took stances on things, that took positions to where I was, foundationally steady. And so achieving these tasks early in the day and really allowing yourself to realize that you can get through that day with accomplishing something incredible ultimately allowed me to realize that I would find myself not having to stagger within that, readying myself of challenging the world with the stances that I'm wanting to take, from the stances that I fully believe that the individual that I'm trying to become and wanting to become and will become would take. And that effort is very grandiose. That effort is very seemingly insurmountable, but I see that as, for my part of the day, that is where I embrace and I engage willingly every single day with a macroscopic. And I just want to hear your thoughts on what are your thoughts on, and how do you deal with, whether it's daily or twice a week or 4 times a week or 6 times a day, I don't know. How do you deal and battle with the macroscopic of what you and what we are trying to achieve with Impossible Performance? Like, what does that look for you? What does that look like for you?
I think the macro carries a heavy dichotomy with it, because on one hand it is so infinitely valuable and mandatory, in the sense that, in what Damien Addie's father helped both of us do, was get really crystal clear on what is that 10-year goal, what does that lifetime goal look for us. And it's very incredibly important, because it gives you a very clear picture of what you're working toward. I mean, literally the first step that I laid out in this process was, the second step was understanding what you want the outcome to be. We defined it as the person you're wanting to build. But in this particular context, it's what are we working to create with Impossible Performance? And without a clear, like crystal clear picture of what that looks like, it's very hard to find direction. And without proper direction, without a very solid, well-defined, clear path, it's very easy to get lost in the noise. It's very easy to get pulled in this direction, and get yourself invested in this thing, and this thing, and this thing. And I've done it so often in my life before. I know what it's like to say yes to everything and then realize you're putting so much time and energy and effort and resource into things that are actually not in line with your purpose and that are not maximally driving toward that outcome. You know, it's the difference between walking on a very clear, paved, well-manicured bike path through the woods versus trying to follow an unmarked trail. On the unmarked trail, it's going to be very easy to go off the path, very easy to get distracted, very easy to stumble through the roots and the rocks and everything else. And the macro, having that crystal clear view of that big picture outcome, is massively important in helping to define, to manicure that path toward what it is you're actually working to build. On the other side of that dichotomy, though, it can provide challenge and struggle in the sense that a lot of times it can feel so far away that you start to wonder if you're even making progress toward it. And I know that's something I struggle with on a daily basis. I know it's something you've struggled with. It's something that I think anybody with an impossible pursuit will struggle with. I think it's part of the human condition. And when analyzed appropriately, there certainly can be a beauty to it, but it doesn't make it any easier. I mean, literally just this week, I was texting you about our school platform, and I wouldn't say I was spiraling, but I was in that mode of like, what are we doing here? Like, how do we fix this? How do we grow this?
There were some unexpected
how do we move
brake
forward?
lights going off.
Yeah. So it's normal. It's natural. Just because you feel that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. But it does come with having that, the grander the vision, I think the easier it is to feel further away from it, and the easier it is to feel like you're not making progress toward it. What I do in those moments, actually, what I do and what I did this past week is my go-to is always in the pursuit of, I'm trying to make sure I say this correctly. It's not just work harder, but it's always framed in the pursuit of furthering my own knowledge and understanding. It's educating myself. And that's exactly what I've done when I felt like school was not growing how I wanted to see it grow. I dove way deeper into school. I got involved with communities that teach you how to build your school platform. I got involved with people who have already done it and who understand a lot of the framework behind it and are excited to help us do the same in ours. And by doing that, I basically just take more action and further my own education, because I always recognize these problems as if we're not growing in this particular manner, there's something I'm not doing right. There's something I can improve. There's something I can do better with. And I assume that responsibility because, as we've discussed so many times, with this, the assumption of that responsibility, you gain quite a lot of power over the situation to change it. Because if I just sat back and said, oh, it's just the platform doesn't work. Oh, it's just that people don't care about their lives. They don't care about themselves. It's Facebook and Meta shadow banning us and not showing our content to people. None of those things are true. But if I said those things, if that's the narrative I wrote for myself, I would sacrifice all power over the situation. If I allowed myself to internalize the belief that it's everybody else's fault that we're not growing in the manner that we want to, I have no power to change other people. And therefore, I would actually worsen the situation because I would sit back and become a victim of that situation I built up in my brain. But by assuming that there is something that we can improve, that I can improve upon to further this mission, I open myself up to an endless world of possibility. And always through education and deeper understanding do I find comfort and solace in that process. I don't know that that approach is what works for everybody, but especially for me with a deeply analytical mind, it really brings a lot of clarity for me. And that's exactly what's happened this week. The first thing is I realized that I thought that I was holding a good standard for how active I was on the platform until I started getting involved in other groups. And I realized there is a whole new standard beyond even what I thought was the standard. So on the school community, you can go over to your personal profile tab and you can see these little dots. They dot off every day based on were you active that day. And I was active nearly every day since the inception of our platform. And I thought, man, that's a pretty good standard I'm setting. I barely miss a day. Well, then I realized that anybody who's actually taking this seriously not only has that dot, but the dot changes color based on exactly how active you are. And it maxes out at 10 what they call activities a day. That's a like, a comment, a vote on a poll, a post, whatever it is. And I got involved with some of these people who had these bigger communities where they're making $50,000, $60,000 a month, where they have thousands of members in their group, where they're making high level impact, and they're having hundreds of activities every single day without fail for years in a row. And then I saw that and I'm like, that is the new standard. It redefined an entirely new standard for me. And so now I've gone from a place where I might miss a day here and there to and even on my good days, I might have 5 to 6 activities. Ever since I had that realization, that standard changed for me and I made that shift, I'm now no fewer than 25 activities a day, sometimes 30, 40 activities a day. And so I've completely redefined my own standard for what does a actionable engagement look like on this platform. It's allowed me to get much more immersed in the platform, see it through the lens of other communities, and just being in other communities has helped so much because I see, oh, this is what they're doing that seems to work for them. That makes a lot of sense. I'd never considered that before. Some of the connections we made, we've already got 2 more podcasts lined up that we're going to appear on from the connections I made on, but just by diving deeper into this platform. And so I don't want to labor on that too much, but all of that encapsulated in a shell. The macro is good for providing clear direction, but the micro day-to-day is where we need to invest our emotion and invest our value. Because if we invest all of that emotion and value into the macro big picture 10-year goal, we open the trap for ourselves to feel as if we're not making progress. When in reality, progress is made every single day that we check off that task list, that we achieve those tasks that we have to achieve on the days that we do everything in alignment with that impossible version of ourselves, the days we be impossible. By doing that on a daily basis, that is the only thing that achieves that macro vision. So by investing our value and our emotion into that micro to support it as much as possible and make sure that that micro is firing, we achieve the macro. Think about it in terms of like a car engine. Each individual firing of each piston does not produce all that much energy or output relative to what the total output of the engine is at maximum RPM. But if one piston misfires in a Bugatti going 240 miles an hour, I'm guessing you're not going to have such a good outcome.
I mean, there's 15 others working, but yeah. Yeah. No,
this is me trying to play to the car analogy that I don't really understand that well.
But it's still, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
That is not a good thing at all. No. Okay. Yeah. I like that. I like that and that's a good distinction, is that it is still, I know that I have focused on the macro for today, but it is mightily important that the micro is working, and that, and what I had referenced to earlier, and what you're referencing, there is that there's action to be taken regardless of feeling, of results from an analysis, and I think that's what I was trying to get to in my original soapbox statement. Was I had to find value in those moments of where I was like, wow, I'm not writing. My thinking is not being productive. I need to go do something else. So I go walk on the treadmill. Because sometimes this happens at like 9 p.m. in downtown Salt Lake City. I'm not taking a walk alone in a downtown at 9 p.m. Not going to happen. So, but still finding value in that, still finding that as a negotiation for time, but that you're still positive for that time. But taking action in those moments, I think that's wildly important, because also when you take action in those moments, it gets you, and this is what it's benefited me with, heavily, is that when you take action in those moments, and always the moment of educating self to bettering and preparing self. The example that always comes up for me is that when I was originally diagnosed, you had told me that educating myself on not only the treatments, and not that I can sit here and tell you the full, drug names that I was going through and stuff, but it was, like educating myself on the side effects, what I should expect, what other people had gone through when going through said treatments, and also preparing myself for, what happens after, and ultimately making sure that what I had learned previously didn't go to the wayside. I think that was something that was also extremely important. Was there was something still positive to take from the previous 1.5 years from my diagnosis, even though it was spent aiming wildly at something in life, and yes, I was coming up to this precipice of potentially, pursuing a master's, and I still, I don't think that was aimless, but certainly pretty much up until that point things were aimless. But there was something that wasn't aimless, and that was our friendship, and that was my willingness to educate myself in a manner, or in the world of, fitness and diet and nutrition, that I had not taken seriously up until that point of us finding each other at Sam's wedding, and rekindling a friendship. I realized quite heavily in that point, and I took it into the cancer treatment, and ultimately I'm very thankful for those moments, because I realized that action and education was certainly the right move to make in those moments, that I could have as as you've insinuated a few times and talked about before, was just finding yourself in this spiral of just victimhood and victimizing self, and like just loathing something that's happened to you, and you're like, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? I'm just going to sit here and really just find myself in this position that is not moving in any direction other than no direction, if that makes any sense. At least it does in my head, because I've been in that position. But yeah, I really like taking action when action just needs to be taken is really, really, really powerful and impactful to hear when looking at what the micro and where it stands in terms of its importance and value when looking at the macro as well.
Yeah. Well, and there's, and I'm glad you brought this point up too. There's a big difference between negotiation and allocation. So what you talk about in those moments where you sit down to write and it is just not going anywhere, you've checked off that task by writing. Like, you don't need to make the task 1,900 words every single day, and you've done a great job of that. So you've checked off the task of practicing your writing. Yeah, today was not the most fruitful, productive day you've ever had. That's fine. You've still reinforced that creative skill, because the brain, which encompasses both the cognitive, mental, analytical process, as well as all of human emotion and desire, all is encapsulated within the brain. Synapses are formed, connections are built and reinforced through repetition and experience and volume. So just by tackling that every single day, by practicing that creative process every single day, you are building that skill. Even if it's a day where it's hard and it doesn't feel like it's fruitful, you are reinforcing, you are strengthening those synapses by practicing that every single day. I mean, you could write, just think about it. Like, so many people have done like Duolingo or practiced a new language at this point. Would you get more out of it? Do you think you would be better off by spending every Sunday, you practice that language for 7 hours straight, but only on Sunday and not the rest of the week? Or would you be better off, learn more and progress much more quickly if you did 1 hour every day of the week? It's very obvious that it's the latter. And it's because synapses aren't built by, and actually volume was the wrong word, because that's the same amount of volume in terms of hours. Synapses are built in repetition. So even though you do 7 hours straight on Sunday, that's still only one instance of practicing that skill. Whereas if you do it every day of the week, you have 7 instances of going back to that skill. Synapses are built and most heavily strengthened when you practice a skill for literally any amount of time. Certainly more time will yield more results, but practicing it for any amount of time, stepping back from it, letting those synapses kind of rest and form and start to build. And then you come back to it and your brain relearns that path, relearns that process. It's just going back to walking on the bike path analogy through a forest. Or just driving through a city. If you got in a situation where you're in a new city and you've got to drive to work and navigate the traffic and the routes and everything, you're going to rely on your GPS pretty heavily for a few days. You're probably going to have to really think about it on how to get to work. After the 100th day of doing it, you will do it without even realizing you're driving, with no assistance from a GPS. It's because those synapses become so heavily reinforced and wired in your brain. And then say you move to another city for 10 years and you come back to your original job, you'll have to learn the route again, learn how to get there again, but you're still going to have some of those original synapses in there, and you'll reignite those synapses much more quickly. It's amazing how the human brain works and builds these connection points. But all that to say is there's a difference between negotiation and allocation. By having that active repetition in there, even on the bad days, just by doing it at all, you are reinforcing those connective synapses. You're reinforcing that creative skill. But what you bring up there is you brought up the idea of allocation, which is highly important in the sense that when you realize you're having a day where writing is just not happening today, like it's just not going to be a powerful day or a productive day of writing, that's totally fine. Because the impossible version of yourself is not solely rooted in being a writer. Yes, that's certainly a heavy aspect of it, but it's not the single sole only aspect of it. And even if it were, there are other things you could do with that time, energy, and resource that would still reinforce writing, that isn't you forcing yourself down this path that just is not productive today. So what you're doing is you're not negotiating. You're not saying, oh, today is not a productive day of writing, I'm just going to quit and watch Netflix instead. You're saying today is not a productive day of writing. Let me invest more into a different critical task that is working for me today. A different
domain.
Exactly. Yeah. So you hop on the treadmill. You're working on building that physical domain of performance on days that the emotional, the creative, the mental, whatever you want to call it, domain is not working for you that day. And so rather than wasting time and energy and resource forcing yourself down that creative path, you just say, you know what? We practiced it, we got the repetition, and I checked off that task. Let me move to something else that might serve me better, because maybe you'll be physically primed that day for an amazing training session, or even just the act of doing some low steady state cardio will give you time to think and process and work through some of that creative mindset in the background. None of that is lost resource. It's only allocated resource. You're taking resource from the initial bucket you thought it might go into, putting it into another bucket that still serves that impossible version of yourself just as highly.
And you need to be very okay with that, because my immediate gut reaction is as you're saying that, I'm sitting here battling the overcritical Austin of just like, okay, but you didn't write 6 pages. You only wrote 4. You didn't write 6. You need to feel bad that you didn't write those 6. You lazy son of a gun. Like, you didn't write the 6. Austin, you didn't write 6. And that is what went through my head for a very long time. And I still have to battle it.
Where's that come from?
I have no idea. I think I have somewhat of an idea. Sorry for the knee-jerk reaction or response. Part of it is this very deep and subconscious desire, Matt, this desire of, I used to perform very, very well in the world of education back in the day. And then I found this point of where my response to my environment was, the world is against me, so therefore I'm going to put my head down, listen to music, play video games, and eat myself to gorging amounts. And coming out of that, my ultimately I forced this upon myself of having this feeling of I'm not good enough. Like, I have all of these dreams and I have all these desires, yet ultimately I'm not good enough to achieve them. There's no value in Austin. Austin is really cool, and he could do so much, but you're just so lazy, man. You're lazy, you're fat, and you just need to understand that, where you come from and who you are and you're not. Why are you trying? Why would you do that? And that's why getting into a life of smoking marijuana was just such a relief, such a as you just heard and probably saw, was just like a weight off my shoulders when I first found it.
So it removed that urgency. It removed that.
It removed the
requirement, that responsibility.
It removed the responsibility. It was a removal of self-worth, self-love, self-accountability, self-responsibility, to pursue some course and some purpose that was going to ultimately lift me to that portion of which I knew that I ultimately deserved, and that I not only deserve, but that I need to do to be a positive, a net force for good in society. And that removal of responsibility and that removal of what Austin could have been and should have been was, I mean, it was a relief, but obviously we all know that those temporary reliefs only lead to long-term hardship. And that's what I experienced, going into the years leading up to when I had met back up with you. Mm-hmm. You found me in a very, again, I mean, sure, I may have looked fine and I may have sounded fine and I may have, did this and I did that, and you're like, oh, Austin's so cool. But internally, I was fighting off, not fighting. No. Sorry. Wrong use of words. I was running away from the demons of which would just sink their claws into me ever so deep. And I couldn't deal with responsibility. I couldn't deal with life. I didn't want to. Ultimately, I didn't want to, because I felt extremely unworthy. And that was just the environment that I grew up in. And that led me to where I am now, and seeing the kind of 180 that I've been able to make, that I still struggle with. I still mightily struggle with, and I'm nowhere near perfect, and that's not my goal, because that's what it used to be, is that, and that explained, and that was the reason why I had set myself up with these, instead of the 20 tasks that I had explained before, where I could achieve 18 of them, not easily, but within reason, that I would give myself these 1 or 2 or 3 monumental tasks, these Mount Fuji level tasks of just unattainable, just extremely unattainable in the manner of which I was living life in those moments. Because I'd be like, well, in order to find value in myself, man, I gotta I need to be Beethoven 2.0. That's the mindset that I had, and it's so frustrating to think about now. But I have like Mozart 2.0, I have to be, in order to give myself that, and to permit myself to accept that what I had achieved and what I have done was worthy of the individual that grew up thinking that I was just invaluable, and thinking that I was not, that I was destined for something extremely boring and extremely sad, and a life not I'm not going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where, honestly, that lines up so well with what we talked about Dan last week. He talked about the American education system and how it's basically programmed us since children to accept failure as ultimate defeat, from which there is no return.
Yeah, just to be robots. and that was my experience. Was, I had a very similar experience to, I'm assuming, the majority of the schools that Dan's dealing with. Is, I was in a class of 30 people. Small
rural school.
Small. I mean, 5 K through 12 building of maybe 500 students.
Not taught to have big dreams.
It's everybody was like, if you don't go to college, you're
no hope for your future.
You're working at international paper.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. That's all there is for you.
It's either that or college.
Yeah. So. And that's where that's where that conversation is so important, because schools are built that way. At least when we were in them, they were built that way, in the sense that you either get an A and that's defined as success, or you get a D or an F and that's defined as failure. And if you fail, you fail. And that's bad, and it's only bad, and there is no recovery from that. Even a lot of cases, if you get A's the rest of the time, it'll negatively impact your grades so much that you may still not even pass the class.
And that's a correlation for
Yeah.
for all students that deal with that, because you would see that with my GPA, it was 4.0, and then
Started going downhill.
some
and it
grade,
tanked.
I think it was like 5th or 6th, kind of getting into junior high. I started wearing the wannabe Etnies, shoes and black jeans.
Be real, we
and-
all had that face.
in metal, the metal shirts, and I was just like, yeah, like the GPA was going down, and you would also see my attitude go down to the absolute dumps, and that's just exactly that's what we the majority of us would face, because it was just so. Those types of schools are just, for me, it's demeaning towards helping you create a life worth living.
Yeah. And if you're taught that this is like you failed, this was bad, and there's no path forward. Like if that's what you're given, you will absolutely go to the place of saying, what's the point, throwing your hands up and giving up on it?
No.
Why would you fight a battle you can't win? Or at least that you believe you can't
That you're
win.
taught that you can't win.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think we do such a disservice in the concept of failure, and where you and I have spent so much time talking about this idea of embracing failure, seeing failure not as necessarily something we strive for, but as a positive opportunity when it happens, because it will inevitably happen. No matter who we build in our lives, no matter what we achieve in our lives, we will always face moments of failure.
Because it means you tried.
Exactly.
You took action.
Yeah.
You tried to educate yourself in
and
a
you,
moment.
you pursued a goal that you weren't sure you could achieve. Like if you were certain you would achieve everything you pursued, your chances of failure are going to be extraordinarily small. But on the other side of that, there's not going to be a lot of gratification, because there wasn't very much to overcome in the first place. And by viewing failure not as something to strive for, but as something actually positive when it does come, because of the opportunity there is to learn and grow from it, you can build so much strength and growth from that, and actually use it as a positive driving force, because you know that the next time you encounter that same situation, you will have new experience, new synaptic connections in your brain, new understanding of the challenge and the problem, and you will not make the same mistake, at least to the same degree of severity as you did previously. And that's where failure can be such a powerful teacher, and that's where we have to be able to rewrite that narrative regarding failure for ourselves, lest we get to that place where we just throw our arms up and say, what's the point?
Yeah. Powerful stuff.
Yeah. So that's really my thoughts, and I think definitely a good framework for self-value, not negotiating with your own value, and subsequently not negotiating with the tasks we have for ourselves on a day-to-day basis. So what we talked about today, guys, is we talked about step one is finding that self-value, building that self-value. And even if you're not somebody today that you feel like you have a lot of inherent self-value for who you are right now, design a version of yourself that you want to build, that you want to become, and that you will have value. Like if I became this person, I would have value for myself, and then foster that value for that person. The value you have for that person will spill over to who you are today, and going down the path to becoming that person will start building incremental value within yourself as you go down that path. Step two, figure out the outcome. Who is that person I'm looking to build? What would they think, feel? How would they act? And how would they carry themselves throughout a day-to-day basis? Then literally be that person to the highest degree you can on a day-to-day basis. In every situation, ask yourself, what would this person I'm working to do, how would they behave? How would they act? How would they think? How would they feel? Then literally try to achieve that at the highest level every single day. That's being impossible. Next step is creating that list of tasks for yourself. And if I do these 2 to 5 simple tasks, not always
Start
easy,
small.
but yes,
My
simple,
gosh.
simple tasks that if I do
Simple.
these, I will absolutely move forward toward that person.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you can't build it in such a framework that they have to be these monumental, world-changing tasks.
These monstrous kind
Because-
of beings in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, they shouldn't be totally insignificant and easy either, but they can't be these monumental tasks because you can't make the macro the micro. You know, you can't make this overarching thing you're trying to create. Like, for example, my 10-year macro is we're working to build Impossible Performance to a $5 million business. We're working to get over 1 billion downloads on the podcast platform. Well, those things we don't inherently know how to do right now. You know, we've built experience, we've built repetition, we're on the path to getting there. But I couldn't tell you right now exactly how this is going to become a $5 million business. We have ideas, we have strategies, and we're acting on those right now. But that's something we've never done before. We don't have a solidified framework for it. And so if I decided that like that has to be my task right now today, I would absolutely inevitably fail.
Yeah, there are certain goals
Yeah.
that you're going to start chasing. You're going to start chasing your tail.
Yeah, and there would be no path forward from that failure, no way out. And it would be very easy to slip into that mindset of like, well, what's even the point?
Yeah.
You know, and then to give up from there.
And then you realize that you have 9 years and 6 months left. You know,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That was a macro goal for a reason.
Exactly.
A long-term goal.
Exactly. So by focusing on those micro day-to-day tasks of things that are very simple, not always easy, but very simple and straightforward to achieve and check off, and then tying your value to those tasks in the sense that when you complete those 2 to 5 simple tasks every day, you actually feel quite good about yourself, quite reinforced in who you are being, who you are becoming, that impossible version of yourself you're working to build. You start to build up a significant amount of repetition, which we talked about as being those synaptic responses in your brain that drive both the mental and emotional domain of performance. And then you also start to generate momentum toward that person you're working to become. Momentum works in every direction. Whether you're going backward or you're going forward, no matter where you're headed, what path you're on, momentum will drive you further down that path. So make sure you're on a path that you want to be on. The next was then, what was the next thing we said? It's already slipped my brain.
To go from these like small...
Checking off the daily tasks.
and... you have the analyzation part as well.
Yes,
So
yeah.
So to look back upon that without being overly punitive and overly judgmental
Yeah.
towards yourself.
So analyze and assess what you did. Okay, yeah. So on the times that we fail, and we will inevitably fail, figure out what happened, what went wrong, where was the roadblock, learn from it, grow from it, tie that back into your critical task, figure out how can I set myself up for better execution, accomplishing those tasks as early in the day as possible so that you don't allow you allow for as little room to negotiate with yourself as possible, and you subsequently reinforce and bring more value to that person you're becoming by achieving and accomplishing them. So I guess step 3 was creating the task list. Step 4 is checking off the task list
And making sure that you're on task.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
And again, that's where you can engage with the wiggle room. And that
Yep.
you say, okay, well, I accomplished 8 out of 10 tasks this, 15 out of 17 tasks for the week, and so what did I do to fill in those 2 tasks that I missed? Oh, well, I walked a mile, or I went and visited a museum or something like that. That's my experience. I mean, it may not be yours, but like that's what I do, to embrace the creative side. And so that's where you can come in and say, okay, well, I still did something that benefited me, but it wasn't necessarily like, I missed writing 2 pages. Let's bring out the ruler and start smacking, knuckles and stuff. No, it's not necessary.
Yeah. So it's setting yourself up for success as much as possible and achieving those tasks, getting them done early in the day. And just literally what I've been doing lately is just making yourself do it right now. Like when you have the opportunity, and I will tell myself, and in most cases this holds true, all you need to do is start. If you just start right now, you'll get it done much more quickly than you expect, and it will not be as hard as you expect once you're done. You'll look back at it and say, I got that done more quickly and more easily than I expected myself to. And then keeping that idea strong of, I'm not going to negotiate. If needed, I will allocate my resources. I will put them into different buckets that still serve that impossible version of myself I'm looking to build. But I will not negotiate, because when I negotiate on the tasks I have to achieve on any given day, I negotiate on my own value. And we can never allow ourselves to go down the path of negotiating on our own value. And that's really what step 5 was. Don't negotiate on your own value. So that's the 5-step process. If you guys have questions, thoughts, any ideas regarding this entire conversation, please leave your comments below. We'd love to hear them. We answer them all ourselves. And we want to hear what your guys' perspective is in this topic, because this is a powerful one. And in the age of social media, instant gratification, endless amount of TV and movies on Netflix, endless amount of content with algorithms generated to fuel that dopamine button as much as possible in our brains. There's a lot of noise that exists in the world today. The one thing that will keep you centered in moving down the direction of that well manicured path through the woods is having value in yourself and or who you're becoming, and that macro goal toward what you're building, driven by the micro daily tasks that fuel it. So with that, brother, anything you have left to add?
Just be present in the moment.
Absolutely. Love it. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode. As always, you know the rule. If you got something out of today's episode, which we absolutely know you did, please copy that link in your browser or off your cell phone and paste it onto Facebook, paste it on an Instagram, paste it into a text message that you send to every contact in your phone, and share it with as many people as you know whom you believe it would help. Because at the end of the day, that is how we achieve everything we're striving for at Impossible Performance. If you want to dive deeper into these conversations, have group call sessions where we discuss challenging topics just like this. Give your own input into the topics we discuss on the podcast. Click the top link in our show notes. Join our school community today. You get a 7-day free trial. Hop on, and if you're not getting anything out of it after 7 days, cancel it, and you have absolutely nothing lost. But I promise you, the moment you step into that community and experience the power of authentic human connection driving toward a common goal, you will realize it's one of the highest investments you can make today. So we'd love to have you guys join on there, become a part of the conversation off the podcast, and there's tons of other content that you get access to there that we would love to share with you guys. And beyond all of that, we want to thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this platform. Thank you for helping us to drive forward this vision we have, because at Impossible Performance, we are striving to build a global culture of strength, fostering a spirit of growth in constant pursuit of the impossible. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, be impossible.